All right, so...
Hi, this is Alex Rollin. I'm here with Mario McCarthy. And he just asked me a question of what I think about government interfaces and how we're programmatically interacting with governments and how we can wrap an API around that. And, the first thing I thought of was that from a very young age, Americans are taught that government is an input-output business, and it's made to seem almost canonically programmatical. But as we grow older and older, we learn more and more that it's a conversation that's happening in a faraway place that we don't have a lot of access to. And the discussion, though relevant, is not necessarily one we can engage in. And I myself have never been polled, so if that says anything.
It probably does. It probably does.
So I've thought long and hard about getting involved in the political system in the U.S., and one of the ways that I've decided to do that was to look into how the actions of citizens and sort of the patterns of design that they use to create their own living systems in their communities, how that has to be sort of designed around by the government. And I've found more flexibility here in Europe, and that's one of the reasons that I'm here, is that I've seen more expressions of creativity in the face of reform, if you will, or all sorts of the ways that things go. This is the way things are, and you have to do things this way. And there's just a lot more of that and a lot less of it at the same time here. So, for interfaces to be relevant in Europe, it would assume that the polity would already have some experience with interacting with the government or some desire to do so. And I'm not so sure that that's actually the case here or in the U.S. You don't think it's one of the assumptions. Yeah, I'm just saying it's one of the assumptions.
No, I mean, people are interacting with the government all the time. They pay taxes, they fund businesses, they register their kids into schools.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
So these are all things that can be automated, right?
The filing of corporate papers is already automated in the U.S. There's a lot of companies that do that kind of service to make sure that individuals don't screw it up. And a lot of that is taken care of here in Holland, at least by one of the organizations that works. It's a quasi-governmental institution in one of the highest sorts, where they just advise people. Somebody yesterday told me that they were very proud that if I wanted to start a company in Holland, I could go there for half an hour of free advice.
Nice.
So they give you all the forms, some of them even in English, and then they give you advice about how to file them and what to do with them and what other kinds of things you need to get done. And then they offer additional services for €30 an hour.
But that's not very useful, because what we really want is a function that you type in the name of the company, and when it returns, it will pass you a company object that you can manipulate.
Yes. We were talking about company objects and
company objects, or tax objects, or personal objects.
Yeah. And you make a good point that one of the things about a governmental interface is not just about affecting legislation, which is kind of the direction that I was going with it. Because when we started this conversation earlier, we were discussing what an MEP or what somebody in the legislature in a particular parliament of a particular country might need to do, and there's the business of the citizens as well. So, yeah, getting down tax records, actually eliminating the professional class that mediates tax law, professionalizing that in a programmatical way, allowing people to use that information in an analytical way instead of having to rely on meat power in order to do that. So, giving tools that allow individuals to access business intelligence around their own tax records, allow them to analyze their own expenditures over a year, allow them to file those taxes themselves without fear of provoking something or some kind of backlash reaction from the government, which is there was a person recently here who was responsible for filing the returns of something like 3,000 people, and he had a systematic exemption that he was taking for these people that was illegal, and every one of those people's tax records was taken into question at that point. And it's almost impossible to be able to audit it's impossible for citizens to audit. They have to do that through the government. And if there was clear, transparent rules, and we can analyze, like for example, if we have a server running business intelligence software that's interacting with people's finances in order to produce a tax return, then somebody else can audit the intelligence of that server without any problems. instead of having an issue where you have to go and catch somebody in the act or check the records or all this other type of analysis. And then, even then, since it's digital, then the government itself can do a backwards audit on it. So that would also be the case with any other typically difficult task that somebody might have to undertake, like filing corporate papers, where the software or some other infrastructure service might facilitate their collection of material pertaining to their records of incorporation, like how their business will function, or helping them to systematize voting rights within the organization, or delegations of shares or voting powers, and on a very simple level, help people to form cooperative organizations where the actual business model is encoded in software, and from the very start complies with tax records, and they won't have to ask the same questions that I do, which is, what is the government authority that monitors tax and licensing services in the food service or bike repair industry, and how do I find out what insurance must be used in order to cover those things? So those things can be automated and systematized in a very, in a situation that might not be one that is. The government would want to run it eventually, and they would be pleased to have it run by citizens. And they would be pleased to see that there was a lot of error taken out of the system, especially if there was some way that they could test it or tax it, like systematic testing.
This is kind of like the flip side of privatization, right? Where governments have been trying to privatize all of their functions for a very long period of time, but not because they particularly want these functions to be in the hands of individuals who are going to profit from them, but just because they want to simplify their own processing.
Yes. Well, for example, in Holland, one of the things that they've done is they've outsourced the associational oversight of housing brokers. So in the doing of this, they only have 2 or 3 people, where previously there was probably 15,000 who were involved in it. And now those people work for external organizations and institutions, and the government still has direct oversight of the standards, but the people themselves are responsible for implementing them. And the only reason that they can force that, they can externalize those costs onto the populace, is because they have made the rules open and transparent. And so the same thing is true for everything that should happen in the Belastingdienst or whatever tax office you're talking about, except that especially in countries like this one and US, where you have a lot of uprising capitalism, you have tall poppy syndrome, it's sort of seen as a test of your rigor if you can figure out how to get these things filed. But anybody who has enough money can pay somebody to do it for them without knowing how it works, or going through the process of understanding the relationship of a corporation to the government body and the populace as a whole. So in the process of doing this, you sort of you've made it so that the people are no longer responsible for the contracts that they make. Not that some of them don't know what they say, but just by and large they don't necessarily, they're not involved in actually writing them anymore.
So what's the conclusion then? Well, I mean,
the conclusion is that as an interface, government should offer a number of recurring services activities that are then sort of encapsulated within an educational framework that contextualizes the services and offers additional learnings into them. I think that will only happen over time, but it's not to say that most of the educational infrastructure or the information itself is not on file somewhere in a government entity. It's just that it's not seen. It's a bad user interaction pattern. That's what it is. It's a bad user interaction pattern. So you have to make mistakes and pay extra money for things that would be known, but you pay money instead to an expert because they know which mistakes you're not allowed to make, or which mistake. So they scare you into doing these things, into paying them, and then you end up not making mistakes, but you also learn the process, and you also can't reformat the process or offer any constructive feedback to the government in order so that other people can follow you.
So you're saying open architectures, open information flows, and more programmatic interfaces to governments.
Absolutely.
Great.
And systematic oversight, evaluation.
All right.
Thanks.